Hello and welcome to another video from History, Myth and Legends. My name is Ricardo Calvario and you are watching Atlantis Part 2. Ancient sources for Atlantis outside of Plato reports. First of all, before diving into this fascinating topic, I would like to send a big thank you to all those that in Twitter and YouTube offered me advice, critique and encouragement. I also want to apologize in advance for any name or word misspelled. As you will see, there are many names in this video and not all of them are intuitive to spell or speak. With this said, let's start. After the presentation of Atlantis Part 1, where we looked into the words of Sonsis of Sais, spoken through Plato in Timaeus and Critias, it's now time to look into less known sources that, although less direct and requiring some speculation, are considered to be related to the famous island that in this series I am trying to place in time and space. I will begin with an excerpt from the histories written by Herodotus. From the Garmantians, at a distance again of 10 days' journey, there is another hill of salt and spring of water, and the people dwelling around it are called Atlanteans, who alone of all human beings about whom we know are nameless. For while all taken together have the name Atlanteans, each separate man and woman of them has no name given to them. These utter curses against the sun when he is at his height, and moreover revile the sun with all manner of foul terms, because it oppresses them by its burning heat, both themselves and their land. After this, again at a distance of 10 days' journey, there is another hill of salt and spring of water, and people dwell around it. Near this salt hill is a mountain named Atlas, which is small in circuit and rounded on every side, and so exceedingly lofty it is said to be, that it is not possible to see its summit, for clouds never leave them, either in the summer or in the winter. This, the natives say, is the pillar of the heavens. After this mountain these received their name, for they are called Atlanteans, and it is said that they neither eat anything that has life, nor have any dreams. In this text there are some interesting claims, but we must first look into these names and locations. The Garmantians were a nomadic people that occupied a large portion of what today is the Sahara Desert and Libya. It is believed that they were present in the Fezzan region as back as 10,000 BC. They appear in the written record for the first time in the 5th century BC. According to Herodotus, there were a very great nation who herded cattle, farmed dates, and were known to hunt the Ethiopian cave dwellers living in the desert by the unfair use of 4-horse chariots. These cave dwellers, according to the Garmantians that hunted them, were snake and lizard eaters, uttering a language that was unintelligible and often communicated by squealing. Rome described them as bearing ritual scars and tattoos. I will go back to these cave dwellers further ahead in the text. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, 23 to 79 CE, noted in his natural history that the Garmantes, who were in control of the date-palmed oasis at Fezzan, acted as middlemen between the peoples of North and Sub-Saharan Africa. This arrangement would continue throughout the history of trans-Saharan commerce, because those who controlled the desert, who knew the secrets of meeting its formidable challenges, also controlled the trade. One of those commodities was Saharan salt, or rock salt, as it was known. This was apparently controlled by the Atlanteans. As for the Ethiopian cave dwellers, I would speculate that these might be the last mentioned remnant of the all but extinct Homo erectus that did once occupy the caves in that exact area. Their different looks and cultural behavior could have been the cause for them to be hunted as beasts, from others that feared them not for their power, they had none, but for their strangeness. But enough of that. Now, the Atlanteans, that are the name of interest here, are always referred as people without name, who dwelt in circles around natural springs and pillars of salt. They disliked the sun, who they deemed responsible for their misfortune. There are two mentions of these settlements, being the most distant to the Garmantian capital, somewhere near the tallest Atlas mountain, whose summit was forever above the clouds. I here speculate that perhaps these people who are associated with salt deposits, be them pillars as mentioned or domes, this leads me to say that these Atlanteans were also dwellers of the Rishat structure, far to the southeast that was once a salt dome. This is a place that, despite too wide, 35 kilometers, more or less 21.7 miles, too elevated, 400 meters, about 1,312 feet, and too far from the sea, 500 kilometers or 310.6 miles, has been considered by many as a location of Atlantis, but not as one of the dwelling places of the Atlantean people. However, I am speculating on top of a vague and non-specific old text, whose object of interest is not Atlantis-focused, contrary to Plato's texts I analyzed in Part 1. But I think it's possible that these people, these nameless people, might be the descendants of the Atlanteans that managed to survive, either by being already on these places, perhaps Atlantean settlements of old, far from the main island by the time of its subsidence, or by other means, namely as one of the places where the survivors landed, forced to live an existence on a barren place where the sun would burn every and all. Curiously, and adding to these speculations, while Herodotus called them Atlanteans, the Garmantians, on the other hand, call these tribes as Atlanteans, although not because of the mythical island, but because of their settlements around the Atlas mountain. However, it is probable that they, meaning the Atlanteans, are the ones that named the mountains and not the other way around. In fact, the next cited test somewhat expressed this idea. The last two details given about these people were rather strange. I, for one, know not how to take it. At face value, it means that they eat only subproducts without life. Grains, fruits, and eggs come to mind. This because even the ancient peoples knew that not only animals, but plants are also alive. As for the second, describing them as having no dreams is somewhat cryptic. Are they unable to dream? Even speculation is nigh impossible on this one. I might say that they are a traumatized people, whose sleep is never deep enough to dream. It somewhat reminds me of Tolkien, that was many times assaulted in his sleep by a gigantic wave sweeping the land, that he described as his Atlantis end of days nightmare. He described it powerful enough to awake him from sleep in a disturbed, unpleasant way. Moving on. Now we look at a passage by Diodorus Siculus and his book The Library of History, Book 3, Chapter 4. After the death of Hyperion, the myth relates the kingdom was divided among the sons of Uranus, the most renowned of whom were Atlas and Cronos. Of these sons, Atlas received as his part the regions on the coast of the ocean, and he not only gave the name of Atlanteans to his peoples, but likewise called the greatest mountain in the land Atlas. They also say that he perfected the science of astrology and was the first to publish to mankind the doctrine of the sphere, and it was for this reason that the idea was held that the entire heavens were supported upon the shoulders of Atlas, the myth darkly hinting in this way at his discovery and description of the sphere. There were born to him a number of sons, one of whom was distinguished above the others for his piety and justice towards his subjects, and love of mankind, his name being Hesperus. This king, having once climbed to the peak of Mount Atlas, was suddenly snatched away by the mighty winds while he was making his observations of the stars, and never was seen again. And because of the virtuous life he had lived, and their pity for his sad fate, the multitudes accorded to him immortal honors, and called the brightest of the stars of heaven after him. Atlas, the myth goes on to relate, also had 7 daughters, who, as a group, were called Atlantids. after their father, but their individual names were Maera, Electra, Taigete, Sterope, Merope, Alcyone, and the last, Selaeno. These daughters lay with the most renowned heroes and gods and thus become the first ancestors of the larger part of the race of human beings, giving birth to those who, because of their high achievements, came to be called gods and heroes. Maia, the eldest for instance, lay with Zeus and bore Hermes, who was the discoverer of many things for the use of mankind. Likewise, the other Atlanteans also gave birth to renowned children, who became the founders in some instances of nations, in other cases of cities. Consequently, not only among certain barbarians but among the Greeks as well, the great majority of the most ancient heroes traced their descent back to the Atlanteans. From these words, many meanings can be understood, but if they are correct interpretations of the author's own interpretation, or completely off the mark, is for anyone to guess. From these possibilities, I will speak of one that seems reasonable to me. This was written some 2000 years ago. Sonches from Plato described the last days of the main island of Atlantis as near as it makes no difference 12,000 years ago. My point is that there are a 10,000 years gap between them, so it seems quite reasonable to presume that the Atlanteans of Diodorus are but a pale, beat-down version of those that lived many thousand years before, in a very different planet, both in geography and climate. To Diodorus, the world was but the nations around the Mediterranean, while it was believed, in the Greek world, that the ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules was the great ocean that encircled the known lands. If you watch part 1 of this series, you will remember that the Egyptian priests of Sais, 600 years before Diodorus, knew not only that there were islands across the Atlantic, they were also aware of the American continent. Therefore, I deduced that Diodorus' Atlanteans, that came from 7 females that branded the name, is very likely a morphed version of the 5 twin sons of Poseidon. After all, 10,000 years have passed between the two versions. Humans tend to adapt their lore through time, especially when they are forced to move away from their roots, but their culture tend to go about in circles that in the very least bear the weight of their legacy. These Atlanteans, as Diodorus and Herodotus describe them, are very far from the sophisticated seafaring nation coming out of the Atlantic Ocean. They seem a broken people with no identity or even individual name, although I do not deny that their myths and legends can be mirrored in those given to Solon. So let's now move on to Plutarch, 46 to 120 CE, and his work Life of Sertorius. Here, Sertorius meets with sailors recently arrived from the Atlantic islands, 2 in number, divided from one another only by a narrow channel, and distant from the coast of Africa 10,000 furlongs. So let's stop here for a moment. 10,000 furlongs are 1,250 miles, or 2,011 kilometers. If I use this distance from North Africa into the Azores Plateau, this is what we get. As we can clearly see, the distance leaves us well in the Azores area. Take this in consideration when listening to Plutarch's next words. These are called the Islands of the Blessed. Take notice, it's not blessed, it's blessed with a T. Rains fall there seldom and in moderate showers, but for the most part they have but gentle breezes, bringing along with them soft dews, which render the soil not only rich for plowing and planting, but so abundantly fruitful that it produces spontaneously an abundance of delicate fruits sufficient to feed the inhabitants, who may here enjoy all things without trouble or labor. The seasons of the year are temperate, and the transitions from one to another so moderate that the air is almost always serene and pleasant. The rough northerly and easterly winds, which blow from the coasts of Europe and Africa, dissipated in the vast open space, utterly lose their force before they reach the islands. The soft western and southerly winds, which breathe upon them, sometimes produce gentle sprinkling showers, which they convey along with them from the sea, but more usually bring days of moist, bright weather, cooling, gently fertilizing the soil, so that the firm belief prevails, even among the barbarians, that this is the seat of the blessed, and that these are the Elysian fields celebrated by Homer. I am sure that those that watch part 1 of this series will resonate with me at the similarities between this description and the one given by Sanchez to Solon. So let's see what an Encyclopedia of Classical Mythology has to say about the Isles of the Blessed. With a T, remember. In Greek mythology, a group of islands near the edge of the Western Ocean, peopled not by the dead, but by mortals upon whom the gods have conferred immortality. Like the islands of the Phoenicians in Homer, or the Celtic Avalon and St. Brandon's Island, the Isles of the Blessed are represented as a land of perpetual summer and abundance of all good things. No reference is made to them by Homer, who speaks instead of the Elysian plain, but they are mentioned by Hesiod in Works and Days, and they are also mentioned by Pindar, as you have seen. A very old tradition suggests that the idea of such an earthly paradise was a reminiscence of some unrecorded voyage to Madeira and the Canaries, which are sometimes named Fortunatae Insulae by medieval mapmakers that tend to apply what they know or heard into the known world of their time. Once again, apart from the mistake of placing them upon the closer and more reachable Madeira and Canaries to the south, it is obvious to me that this is an incredible similar to what it is in Critias and Timaeus. Let's now look into Aelian, 175 to 235 CE, in his work titled Various Histories. Theopompos relates the particulars of an interview between Midas, king of Phrygia, and Silenus. Silenus was the son of a nymph, and thanks to this, while being less than a god, was more than a human, an immortal. After they had discussed various matters, Silenus told Midas, Europe, Asia, and Libya are islands washed on all their shores by the ocean, and there is but one continent, which is situated outside these limits. Its expanse is immense. It produced very large animals, and people twice as tall as those common to our climate, and they live twice as long. In here, there are two things I must say. First, that Aelian rejected this idea and considered Theopompos of Chios as an untrusted writer, describing him as a spinner of tales. Now, for the second one, in a more positive line, we now know that the Ice Age humans were much more diverse than previously thought. We already know of 4 species. I would not be surprised if a species either already known or yet to be discovered reveals itself as clever as, if not more, than modern humans. More robust, but not less agile, and 7 feet tall and up. This would fit well as the first humans of the second age of the earth, when the gods not only lived among humans, they had children with them. This is described in myths and legends all over the planet, as the heroes or mighty men and women of the golden days from the past age. As a last one from Claudius Aelianos, here is a citation from his The Nature of Animals. Those living near the ocean tell the tale that the ancient Atlantean kings, tracing their lineage from Neptune, also Poseidon, wore bands made from the sea rams upon their heads, as an imperial insignia, while the queens likewise wore circlets made from the female sea rams. I have yet another source that I place here last, because it is but a commentary on Plato's Timaeus done by Proclus, 412 to 485 CE. It goes as follows. The historians who speak of the islands of the exterior sea tells us that in their time there were 7 islands consecrated to Proserpine, and 3 others of immense extent, of which the first was consecrated to Pluto, the second to Ammon, the third to Neptune. The inhabitants of the latter had preserved a recollection, transmitted to them by their ancestors, of the island of Atlantis, which was extremely large and for a long time held sway over all the islands of the Atlantic Ocean. Atlantis was also consecrated to Neptune. We are now reaching the end of this video, and from what I saw and learned, it seems clear that there was once a large landmass between the Strait of Gibraltar and the American continent, that subsiding into the sea became modern-day Azores. With or without the name Atlantis, it seems certain that there was indeed such land, and it was quite different from all other known places, with an unique climate whose origins came from the depths of time, and that even in its later and lesser years had a strong impact on the Atlantic and Mediterranean civilizations of that time. In Part 3, I will try to join the data from Part 1 and 2, with the available scientific information about the Azores Plateau, its climate, and its abrupt changes through time, about eustasy, that is the measure of global change of sea level as contrasted with local diastrophic uplift or subsidence of the land, diastrophic being the small word that stands for the action of the forces that cause the Earth's crust to be deformed, producing continents, mountains, and changes of level within continental plates. We will look and relate it to isostasy, the rising or settling of a portion of the Earth's lithosphere that occurs when weight is removed or added in order to maintain equilibrium between the buoyancy forces that push the lithosphere upward and gravity forces that pull the lithosphere downward. We will look into the last glacial maximum, or LGM, and of course into the Younger Dryas, the very moment in time from where our civilization had its reboot, evolving or devolving into what we are today. Once all this is combined, I think it will be hard still to prove empirically the existence of Atlantis, but obvious to one and all that the Azores of today is but the mountain tops of a large landmass not so different and in the exact place where centuries of sages told it would be. Thank you all for watching. If by any chance you liked what you saw and heard, feel free to share, like, and subscribe, and comment if you have not done yet so. My name is Ricardo Calvario, and you can find my work and contacts in the links below the video. Until our next meeting, this is an original video from History, Myths, and Legends.